Today's lab will be talking about ABO blood typing. So I just want to briefly go over the reagents that we'll be using today. So in front of us we have all these bottles, these vials. The first three bottles, these are our antisera. We have anti-A, anti-B, and anti-D, and then so that's our forward grouping. And then we have our red cell reagents. So we have A1 cells and B cells. This is our reverse grouping, and together they make up a full blood type. So there is more details and the theory behind all of this posted on Blackboard if you guys want to review the PowerPoint voiceover and the outlines that are posted. But so I'm just going to jump right into the testing. So I'm going to demo the first unknown. The rest of them, I want you to go ahead and just record the reactions on your ABO worksheet and then interp what blood type that unknown happens to be. So just to demo, we are going to take 1 drop of our antisera reagent. So I'm going to take let me back up. So let me move these out of the way. I have labeled my tubes. Let me see if I can show you guys. For my unknown. So the first 3 I have A, B, and D with my unknown number 1. And then I have A and B with like a hash over top of it, or if you want to use like a lowercase a and b, that's fine. Something to denote that that's different than the forward. And then I have a tube labeled my unknown number and then 3 to 5%. So that's going to be my 3 to 5% cell suspension, and I'm going to show you guys how I'm going to make that up. So we're going to be using saline a lot. So I'm going to take my saline and fill my self-suspension tube up all the way. Okay, and then this is my unknown back here. So our samples are red cells, and then we have some plasma too. So as a patient's drawn, the whole blood is collected, but then we spin it down and we separate it out into those 2 components. So we're testing those separately. So I'm going to take my red cells, and to make my suspension, I'm going to add 2 to 3 drops to this tube. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to take another pipette, mix it up and down a little bit. And then we're going to do what we call a washing. So we're just going to wash the red cells with that saline. So I'm going to spin that tube. I'm going to get a balance though. So I'm going to fill another tube with saline. So we're going to spin that tube in our centrifuge, which looks like this. And we are going to spin it for 1 minute. So, and everybody I hope knows how to balance a centrifuge. The centrifuge is really dirty. So just across the street. So I put my sample in number 1, and right across from it is number 7. So that is a balanced centrifuge. We want to make sure that all of our tubes have a partner across from each other and that they're the same volume. So I'm just going to close the lid, snap it shut. So when we set our timer for 1 minute, we're going to wash it for. I'm going to turn my timer past the 1 and then turn it back to 1. So it's going to wash for a minute. While I'm waiting for that, I'm going to dispense my reagents. So I'm going to take 1 drop of my anti-A into my A tube. One drop of my anti-B into my B tube. One drop of my anti-D into my D tube. And all of our blood bank reagents, when they're added, we want to add those at a 45-degree angle. So the drop is a little bit bigger than a straight up and down drop, but we do want to keep it at a 45-degree angle. Blood banking is always done that way. So then now to my reverse, I like to add my clear reagents first so that I know that I've added them already. I'm going to take my plasma, 2 drops of plasma, to my reverse A and my reverse B, my A cell and my B cell. Okay, and I can actually add, so my reagent red cells, my A cells to my A reversed tube, just 1 drop. And then my B cells to my reverse B tube, just 1 drop. Okay, and I think my cell suspension is almost done. And actually, you know what? I'm going to pause the video because I forgot something. Hold on 1 minute. Okay, so I just took my 3 to 5 suspension out of the centrifuge. So if you notice, all that saline is on the top. It's the supernatant, and then my red cells are down at the bottom. So we don't have very many red cells in this tube. So, and I know this is kind of scary for the first time, but what we're gonna do, so I wanna get rid of the supernatant. I'm just going to simply flip it upside down and dump that supernatant out, and then invert it again. And my red cells are going to stay in the bottom of my tube. Mostly. So we still have our red cells. That's what we want. So I'm going to reconstitute this to about a 3 to 5% cell suspension. And when we're doing this, I'm going to add saline a little bit at a time. And just until you get used to making a 3 to 5 suspension, what you can refer to is your reagent red cells. So these, whichever one you want to use, these are already a 3 to 5 suspension. So, and I didn't mention this earlier too, when we use these, we want to make sure, because these settle out, we want to make sure that these are mixed really well before we add them to our testing. So I'm going to add saline just a little bit at a time, and typically when you use 2 to 3 drops of concentrated red cells, it's about maybe a little less than halfway full. So I'm just going to take my pipette, mix that up and down to get that cell button at the bottom mixed in. And then I'm just going to kind of compare. That looks actually pretty good. So I'm going to compare it to my reagent red cells. And that looks pretty good. And again, it is a range, so my reagent red cells are a little bit heavier than my sample, but that's okay. It looks about right. Okay. So now that I have my 3 to 5 red cell suspension, that is only added to my forward typing. So my A tube, B tube, and D tube. So just 1 drop of red cells. Okay, so just to recap, in my first 3 tubes, A, B, D, I have 1 drop of my corresponding ABORh, 1 drop of my 3 to 5 suspension. In my reverse, my A cell and B cell tube, I have 2 drops of plasma of my unknown, and then 1 drop of A red cells, 1 drop of B red cells. So now that I have all my reagents added to my tubes, I'm going to spin these in my centrifuge. And whenever we spin things to read them for the purposes of reading, we're going to spin those for 15 seconds. Unlike the washes are a minute, or at least a minute. And my reading spins are 15 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Oops. And I'm going to mix them a little bit just so everything's mixed well. Okay, so I just used an empty tube for a balance. So I've got a set of 3 and then a set of 3. So we're good, we're balanced. I'm gonna close my lid. And again, I'm gonna turn my dial past the number 1 and then back to the 15. So, blood banking is all based on antigen and antibody interaction and binding. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to read our reactions with this lamp. So we're actually going to be reading the reactions in the mirror. So we're not going to be looking at the tube itself. We're going to be looking at the reaction in the mirror. And we're going to, what we call it, we're going to rock the cell button off. So we're not going to call the reaction strength until our whole cell button is off the tube, the side of the tube. And you'll see that in a second when I start to do it. But yes, we don't want to call our reaction strength until our whole cell button is off. And if you look in the outlines and stuff like that, it outlines the grading. So a 4+ reaction is just a solid chunk, and then a negative is no agglutination at all. So a negative is just kind of like a smoky look. I'm just gonna zoom in on this a little bit so you guys can maybe see it better. And I'm just going to do one tube at a time. Typically, ABOH reactions are very strong or non-existent. So we shouldn't really have anything too much in between. But here we go. So we're looking in the mirror. And I want to have my cell button pointing up. And I'm going to start rocking that. And you can jiggle it a little bit if you need to get that off. And again, we're just gonna keep rocking it until that cell button is off the side of the tube. And if you notice, this is a negative reaction. If you look at it, it's a real smoky look. The red cells are just dispersed. It almost kind of looks like a curly mustache when it rocks back. So that's a negative reaction. Okay, so that is our unknown number 1. If you want to start recording things down, our unknown number 1 are A tube, and then this is our unknown number 1, our B tube. So I'm just going to start rocking it. Again, my cell button, I want it up, and I'm looking in the mirror to see what it looks like. Okay, and that's one big solid chunk. It is off. You see it floating back and forth there. So that is what we would call a 4+ reaction. I know there's kind of a glare. That's a 4+. One big solid chunk, no little agglutinates at all. Okay, this is unknown number 1, our D tube. Same thing as our B tube. That's another 4+ reaction there. So that was our forward typing. Let me show you guys these all together. So A, B, and D. So A is negative, and then we've got those 2 4+ reactions. Okay, so that testing confirms that our patient has the B antigen because our antisera bound to the antigen on the patient's red cells, and that the patient also has the D antigen. Our antisera bound to the antigen on our our antisera bound to our patient's red cells, confirming that the patient has the D antigen. So our negative reaction is showing us that our patient lacks that antigen, that there's nothing for our antisera to bind to. Okay? So just based on our forward reactions, our patient is a B pause. So we have a check and balance system. We want to make sure that we're getting the right type for our patient. So our reverse should be the reciprocal of our forward. So our reverse is testing our patient's antibodies. So this tube is our A cell tube, and it is the reciprocal of that so far. So this we would call a 3+ reaction. Because they're still large clumps, but just not one solid one. And then our B cell tube, so far it looks pretty smoky. And keep rocking it so we get that button off. Okay, and that is a negative reaction. So our B cell is a negative reaction. So it is the reciprocal of our forward. Our patient has the A antibody but lacks the B antibody. So our patient is a B pause. So I'm just going to pause the video just for time savings. I'm going to go ahead and aliquot out all the rest of the unknowns. We've got 8 total. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quickly. And then I'm going to rock the buttons in the mirror, and I want you guys to record the reactions that you're seeing and then interp those. So I will be right back. Okay, so I've added all my reagents to my ABORh grouping. And just to recap, the forward is 1 drop of our ABORh to each of those 3 tubes with 1 drop of our patient suspension red cells. So we're testing our patient's red cells. And then our reverse testing is 2 drops of our patient plasma or serum, and then 1 drop of our reagent red cells, so the A cells and the B cells. Okay, so this is unknown number 2. I'm just going to read 1 tube at a time. So this is our A tube. So go ahead and record this reaction. Okay. Still on there a little bit. Okay. This is our B tube of unknown number 2. Okay. And this is our D tube of unknown number 2. This is our reverse grouping. So our A cell and our B cell. And I didn't mention this earlier, but most often I'm not going to deduct points for the grading of reactions because we can fluctuate like up 1 or below 1. So there could be and that's just different people reading things. Okay, so that's unknown number 2. This is unknown number 3. The A tube. Forward typing, B tube, D tube. Okay, our reverse typing, our A cell. B cell. So if you need to use that chart to grade these reactions, go ahead and do that and compare it to that chart with pictures on it. Okay, so this is unknown number 4, A tube, forward typing. B tube, again unknown number 4, D tube, this is our reverse, so our A cell. And our B cell. Okay, and now number 5, this is our A tube. This is our B tube. D tube. Reverse for unknown number 5, our A cell. And then our B cell. Sorry, there was kind of a glare there. Okay, so that's unknown number 5. Unknown number 6, our A tube. B tube, and then our D tube. Reverse typing for unknown number 6, A cell. And our B cell. Okay, and then unknown number 7, our forward. And this one, we're gonna have to do something a little extra special. So it's our A tube, our B tube, and our D tube. So for this patient, all of our forward reactions are positive. So we have to take an extra step and make sure that our red cells aren't just agglutinating for whatever reason. We want to make sure that we're getting a valid type. So when all of our reactions in our forward are positive, we have to do an extra thing called a saline control. And this is for type ABORh people only. So I'm going to take another tube and I'm going to take 2 drops of just my blood bank saline. And then a drop of my patient red cells. Okay, and I'm gonna mix that up and centrifuge that for 15 seconds. Okay, and to make this a valid type, a type that we could result, we want this control to be negative because that would validate that our type that we're getting with our ABORh reagents is reacting appropriately, that our patient's red cells are not just agglutinating just to agglutinate. We want that reaction saline control to be negative. So this is our saline control. And it is negative, so that's good. Our type, forward type that we were getting is validated because of this reaction here. So we'll go ahead and record this reaction in that saline control column. But every other type, we don't have to do that saline control because we do have at least one negative reaction in every other type. So that's just a little extra thing that we have to do for ABORh people. So when you're recording that column, you want to put either a capital NT for types that you didn't have to test that for, and or either an equal sign. That also denotes that it was not tested. So for every other type, you want to fill it in that way. So continuing on with our unknown number 7. So this is our reverse A cell. and then our reverse B. Okay, now unknown number 8. This is our A2. B2. And then this is our D tube. I'm sorry I didn't say that. And our reverse A cell. Oop. Reverse B cell. Okay, and that's all of our unknowns. So when you guys are filling in that interp, when you notate what blood type the unknown was, I want you to write the capital letter A, B or O. But when you determine the RH status, positive or negative, I want you to spell that out instead of using like a plus sign or a minus sign. So either spell out the whole word, or you could use POS for positive or NEG for negative. And that just kind of prevents people from misreading what you wrote as someone's blood type. We really don't want to mess that up, because that is very serious if we misinterpret the blood type. So that just kind of prevents, sometimes a plus or a minus might look like one or the other, but when you write it out, then you definitely know which one it is. So go ahead, fill out that worksheet and the interps and upload that to Blackboard so that I can grade that lab, that dry lab. I will see you all next week.